That damn buzzing noise. Made by Ariel Lowe. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. For the past few days, I've been hearing this intermittent buzzing sound. At first, I thought I'd become used to it and stop hearing it entirely, but to me, it just became more obnoxious over time. It transformed into something akin to a constant, vibrating noise in the back of my head. It was difficult to focus on anything. It became so bad that I had trouble sleeping, and it's beyond me how my parents never noticed it. You know what they say though. You lose hearing with age, so I wasn't surprised when they gave me confused looks. Tyler, my neighbor, heard it though, and I was relieved at that. It meant I wasn't going crazy. He's actually the one that brought it up when we were in my bedroom playing video games. With him at my side, I became determined to find the source of this noise. We searched my house first and placed our ears all over the walls. The buzzing sound never seemed to become stronger or weaker, so we went outside. My original thought was that something was wrong with the air conditioning unit. If I was right, it would explain why the sounds transferred throughout the entire house. Needless to say, my theory was wrong. We stood beside the thrumming unit, watching the gigantic fan spin around inside. The unit was vibrating, but it wasn't the sound we were looking for. However, we realized the sound was louder outside than it had been in my room. Searching my backyard up and down, we came to a stop at the wooden face surrounding the yard. We placed our ears to the fence and exchanged a knowing stare. The sound was coming from beyond the fence, and that was enough for the both of us. We climbed the fence and dropped easily to the other side. The area beyond my backyard was filled with untouched forest. I had been over my fence a few times when I had accidentally kicked a soccer ball over, but not often enough to really explore. My parents always complained about there being poison ivy everywhere, and there was. We skirted around it and created a path without a problem. It was really bizarre though. All we could hear was this buzzing sound, nothing else. I mean, we could just barely hear the leaves and sticks crackling beneath our feet, but all other sounds seemed absent. There were no birds chirping, which was the weirdest part for me. You'd be hard-pressed to find an area of woods where there aren't birds constantly singing to each other. As we kept walking, the buzzing sound grew louder, and eventually, we couldn't see my fence anymore. We stopped several yards from a cluster of trees covered in tumor-like growths. We just stood there, staring at it, and neither of us could explain what they were. They appeared like they were a part of the tree, as if the bark had bubbled outward in these strange formations. Trees can actually develop deformed growths called burls, something I learned in hindsight. Naturally though, our first thoughts were to poke it, but both of us were too chicken to get any closer. So, we grabbed rocks instead. It only took one toss. Tyler was a baseball player. The rock collided with one of the large growths, and upon contact, the growth exploded outward, sending chunks flying. Not even seconds later, bees, thousands of bees, swarmed out of the opening and formed into a thick, throbbing mass. Both of us screamed and ran. I had never run faster in my entire life. The bees were hot on our heels, and I could feel their stingers plunging into my arms, my back, my legs, anywhere they could swarm. I don't remember hopping the fence or how I arrived in my front yard, but I must have been screaming bloody murder. I stripped down to my underwear, and my mom began spraying me and the persistent bees with the garden hose. The icy, pressurized water didn't hurt as bad as the stings or the welts that formed instantly. I was ushered into the kitchen, given a towel, and my mom began meticulously removing the stingers with a pair of tweezers. She lost count how many she removed from my body. I was only allowed to change into dry underwear since the stings needed to be iced. The swelling and welts had been unimaginable, and now, I understand how people can die from bee stings. I was forced onto the couch with ice packs positioned all over my body. The majority of the stings were on my back, so I laid on my stomach and must have passed out sometime later. I woke the next day in the same position, and the ice packs had been removed. My mom refused to let me change into comfortable clothing until she inspected all of the welts. Thankfully, the swelling had reduced significantly since the previous day. Over a bowl of soup, I learned that my parents called an exterminator after the incident. Apparently, there had been bees angrily flying around our yard and some of the neighbors' yards. By that point, everyone on our street could hear the enraged buzzing. The exterminator arrived promptly and followed the trail of chaotic bees back to the nest. The man actually told my parents that it had been the largest colony he had ever seen. He sprayed so many chemicals that he didn't want anyone near the area, not that anyone wanted to go investigate for themselves. The whole situation made me feel like a complete idiot. How could we have been so stupid? My only consolation was that Tyler might have suffered just as bad as me with the bee stings. I brought this up to my parents and asked how bad his injuries were. My mother gave me this petrified expression that I'll never forget. There had been nobody behind me when I raced around the side of my house. She hadn't even been aware that Tyler had gone back there with me. I felt guilty, beyond guilty. For the next few days, horrible images of Tyler being swarmed consumed me. I swore that he had been right beside me. What made me feel worse is that the exterminator never saw anyone. If Tyler had fallen and been injured, the exterminator would have known because he had to search the entire area for nests and make sure everything was sprayed with pesticides. About a week after the incident, Tyler was still missing. I decided to search the area for myself, but I wasn't going unprepared. I grabbed a can of my mother's hairspray along with a lighter from the kitchen. If any of these bees were still kicking, then I wanted protection. I hopped the fence and moved slowly through the forest, my right hand clenched tightly on the hairspray. The distance to the nest was much further than I remembered. I knew that I had arrived when I heard a thick crunch beneath my shoes. I glanced down and felt a shiver rush through my body. The entire ground was layered with bee corpses. I couldn't see the dirt or grass, and in some areas, the bees just piled on top of each other. I was on my last nerve when I approached the nests, trying my best to ignore the sickening crunches underfoot. I narrowed my eyes at the nest that we destroyed, and when I rounded the tree, the rest of the nests became apparent, nearly 10 times larger. I cautiously nudged one of the nests which crumbled and revealed the quacks and honeycomb. Dead bees trapped inside of the nest oozed through the opening, and it was enough to turn my stomach. I grumbled beneath my breath and began poking the nest with more confidence, watching more of the pieces fall to the ground. That's when I heard the buzzing return. My heart skipped several beats, and I nearly stumbled backwards and landed in the disgusting ruin of dead bees. I sprinted back several feet and raised the hairspray and lighter, watching the nest from all angles. These bees could appear from anywhere. They must have formed their nests throughout this cluster of trees, and it was very possible that their nests extended into the ground as well and beneath the roots. I bit my lip and waited for the swarm to appear like last time, but they never did. Instead, an odd and disturbing sight took me by surprise, enough for me to lower my guard. I left the clearing filled with dead bees and stepped through several bushes, trying to confirm what I was seeing. My whole body quivered, and I wanted to call out. My voice failed me though, and it might have saved my life. Not even 10 yards from me was Tyler. He was just standing there with his back facing me, and something was wrong. His movements were off. His body was twitching involuntarily, and when he took a step, his posture was rigid while his arms were locked in janky positions. Despite the horrible feeling in my gut, I wanted to call out to him. My concern quickly transformed into fear. Tyler turned and lolled his head to the side as if his neck were broken. He knew I was here, yet he couldn't see me. His eyes were gone. 2 dark sockets stared back at me with bees crawling out of them. Sores layered his flesh which had turned into gaping holes, and a viscous fluid was running down his chin. I was too scared to move. I only ran when Tyler began lumbering toward me, swaying back and forth and twitching. For the second time, I screamed and ran for the hills, trying to outrun the crashes coming from behind me. When I scrambled over the fence, I felt the wood scraping my skin, but I didn't care. I pounded on my back door crazily and slammed it shut once my mother let me inside. She didn't understand much of what I was saying since I was hysterical, but she gathered that I had found Tyler's body in the woods. By the time the police arrived, they waited for me to calm down, so I could explain what I saw. It was a mess, and they must have thought that I was nuts. They searched in the area where I saw Tyler, but they didn't find him. They found his body yards upon yards farther away by a creek. Tyler had been reclined on his knees with his forehead against the ground, immobile and dead. I refused to ID him. I couldn't see those empty eye sockets again. When I recovered from the event, I wanted to know what happened. I emailed the pathologist who performed Tyler's autopsy, and practically begged for answers. I needed a logical explanation for what I saw. He explained how they were going through routine procedure when they hit a minor roadblock. When they sliced Tyler open, dead bees poured out. His body had been literally bloated with bees. His eyes were missing. His jaw was broken, completely unhinged. His teeth were gone along with his tongue, which was replaced with wax. The worst part was this. His organs were gone. All that was left was the skeleton, muscles, and tissues, which seemed to be the base for the extreme amounts of honeycomb within his chest cavity. The pathologist's only theory was that the bees devoured his organs, but bees aren't carnivores. The only way that I can explain this is this. There's a scientific concept called microevolution, and it's defined as evolutionary change within a species or small group of organisms, especially over a short period. It must have been triggered by the pesticides. It must have. Porcelain's fishhooks. Made by Up. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. The year was 1942, and I was a young Jewish boy who was sent to the concentration camp, Auschwitz. My brother and I were separated from our parents a couple weeks back, and haven't seen them since. We were attempting to make it across the border to Russia in order to escape the Nazis, but we weren't fast enough, and they quickly caught up. My brother, Alois, was 2 years older than me, and went to Auschwitz when we were caught. Unfortunately, he died on the 4th day from too much hard labor. I was all alone and on the verge of starvation, for I was younger and weaker than everyone else. When we got our small, disgusting portions of food, the greedy would beat me up and take it from me. I eventually learned to take a bowl of slop and run. Run fast and hard, as far as my feet could take me. Then I would hide. Only after the people hunting me down were gone would I start to eat. I would eat all of it in 2 or 3 bites, since the food was scarce, but I enjoyed every second of it. A couple of weeks later, smoke started puffing up from the ovens in which the Nazis would take a large group of Jewish people and burn them until all were dead. The population in Auschwitz plummeted every week, although new arrivals kept on filtering in. I had made friends, but, sadly, they were soon after burned in the ovens along with their families. I was in the point of time in which I felt incredibly scared, but I wanted to be a hero, so I kept my chin held high and my chest puffed up. Every so often, a new sickness would pop up and kill off nearly half of the people in the concentration camp. I don't really understand why, but nothing bad ever really happened to me. I didn't ever get sick, and, for some strange reason, the Nazis would skip over me when the next oven group was being chosen, even if everyone around me was selected. One time when this happened, a man that used to beat me up for my food gave me a deathly scowl and said, "Little brat. Always getting away with things," and then he spat in my face. One day, I was so confused on why I wasn't being chosen to be put in the ovens that I asked a Nazi on guard. It's not like I wanted to be put in the ovens, but something was fishy about this whole thing. The Nazi told me, "We have something special planned for you," and deviously grinned at me. This just made me even more curious. I asked him what it was, and that was obviously a mistake. The Nazi shot me in the foot and I started to cry. He said, "You want something to cry about, kid? How's this? And he shot me again, but this time, in my right shoulder. The man laughed and shoved me to the ground. I resisted the urge to cry out in pain, and I held back all of my tears, for I didn't want to get shot again. The Nazi started kicking me in the head. I was just about to scream and let it all out when he said, "You're lucky I'm not allowed to kill you, Jew." I stayed there, crumpled up on the mud-ridden ground, as the Nazi walked away, cackling to himself. The next day, I was practically naked, for I had used my clothes to bind my wounds the Nazi had given me. I unsuccessfully tried to remove the bullets, so I applied pressure to the deep holes instead. It was time for a group to be chosen for the ovens, if I had guessed the schedule correctly. However, that day, only one little girl I recognized was taken out of the crowd of people. I recognized her because she had always been there in my sight, she just never said anything. As I looked at her, she looked away. However, she turned back, a fearful look in her eyes, when a Nazi shoved her forward and into the ominous shadows. I desperately wondered where they were taking her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept on thinking about that girl. I was laying in a pool of sweat, and the hay lumps were not very comfortable beds. I felt a cockroach scuttle over my stomach. I fought back the urge to quickly grab it and eat it alive. I had seen others do that, and they quickly got sick and died. Even though I had not gotten sick before, I didn't want to risk anything. All of a sudden, a piercing scream cracked my eardrums. It seemed distant, like an echo, yet so close at the same time. I sat up, and the scream seemed to dissipate. As I laid back down, the screams got louder again. I put my ear to the floor, and the screams got even more vulgar. Then I thought that the screams were from the girl. When the voice said, "Stop it! Stop it!" I was certain it was her. I told myself that the Nazis had made an underground torture chamber right beneath the broken-down hut that I lived in. Little did I know, it was much worse than a torture chamber. The girl was in the assembly line 2 days after the incident with the screaming. Something about her changed, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Perhaps an unsettling milky white film had covered her eyes, or that her skin had been unusually pale. I hadn't noticed those subtle details at first. I went over to talk to her, but when I spoke, her mouth hung open in the same fashion as before and the only noise that came out was a rasping breath. That was when I noticed her platinum blonde hair had turned white. I also noticed her skin and eyes were white as well. And then I saw the most disturbing thing. When I took a closer look, there were stitches running up and down all her limbs and her face, and I suspected the rest of her body as well. But that was not all. The stitches were made out of clear fishing lines. I started crying because I felt so sorry for her and because I was scared. And she started crying as well. Her blank facial expression didn't change, but there were tears coming from her eyes. But the tears were not the regular salty water type of thing. She was crying tears of blood. I backed away from her, mortified by what I was seeing. When the person next to her noticed, he screamed and yelled, "Kill IT! IT will infect us all." Although he didn't know what was really happening. Everyone around her started to punch her and kick her. Her legs gave out. She was still crying blood. However, even though her expressionless face did not so much as twitch, the tears were now like a bad bloody nose, gushing from her eyes. In the moment, I was so scared I almost peed myself. All I could think about was what the Nazi had said to me, "We have something special planned for you." I stared in horror at the girl as she laid there helplessly on the ground, getting kicked and beaten by everyone around her. I didn't even understand why the other prisoners were beating her up. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they thought she had a contagious sickness. I had no idea. I watched her blood tears stain the dirt around her a dark maroon, and thought to myself that I didn't want to be in that situation, but I would end up in it anyways. I thought that the Nazis would do this to all the children, and I would be next. After the girl was beaten to death by her comrades, the Nazis chose one more person instead of a group. But I was wrong. Instead of a child, they chose an adult. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, and he was very handsome. He had the same look of fear in his eyes as the girl did when he looked back at an elderly woman, whom I assumed was his mother. When he turned around a corner, I surreptitiously walked over to the woman. I told her it was going to be okay, and she believed me. But I didn't believe myself. I knew exactly what was going to happen. That night, I actually fell asleep, which was surprising because I could hear the young man's screams. I had a dream in which there was nothing but total darkness and a glint in the distance. Then a face started coming into view, along with the rest of its body. It was wearing a white mask. The mask's only features were squinted eyes and a very smiley mouth, almost like one of the theater masks that represent cinema. The man was wearing a red striped tailcoat and a fancy shirt underneath. It was black, but appeared to be stained with something. He wore black slacks and fancy shoes. He was very skinny, the most skinny person I had ever seen. He was also wearing a very tall top hat that was black with a red ribbon near the base of the hat. He wore white gloves, and the hair behind the mask jutted out in crisp yellow spikes behind him. His yellow cat-like eyes could be seen through the squinting slits on the mask. The man was holding a curved needle. It almost looked like a fish hook. He put his white gloved hands behind his back and started to walk towards me. I couldn't move, but I could hear my heart beating faster and faster, my breaths getting heavier. As the man came closer, I could hear him chuckling. It was a deep chuckle, and it seemed as though it was far away. When he came within 2 or 3 steps away from my comfort zone, he bent over and put his masked face a couple of inches away from my sweat-ridden face. I couldn't close my eyes. Something was forcing me to look directly at him. He smelled strongly of porcelain. Then he said to me, "You are a nice one. I'm going to have fun with you." He vanished into a wisp of smoke and the dream ended. I woke up in a place that wasn't recognizable. It appeared as though I was in a dark hallway made of dirt. I looked up and saw the starry sky high above me. I had fallen down a deep hole and still managed to be asleep. A panning agony formed on the top of my head, and when I put my hand on top then brought it back in front of my eyes, there was blood soaking my fingers. I started to panic, for I was bleeding profusely and stuck in a deep hole. For about 20 minutes I attempted to climb out of the hole. Nothing I tried worked. I then resorted to walking down the hallway and letting the darkness engulf me. It seemed as though the hallway went on for miles and miles. I finally found a ladder going both down and up. I decided to go up, for I wanted to get out of the hole as soon as possible. The ladder went a long ways up until I reached a vault-like door on the ceiling above the ladder. I rotated the wheel and it made a loud screeching noise that pierced my eardrums. I pushed with all my strength to open the hatch, and when I managed to lift it up a little bit, light spilled into the chamber I was in. I was filled with hope and determination that I would make it out. I shoved the door with what little strength I had left and, thankfully, the rusty hinges gave in and the hatch fell open with a clang. I pulled myself up out of the ground and found that I was in yet another chamber similar to the one before, but there was a window where the light had come into the previous room I was in before. I was obviously above ground, but I still had no idea where. I looked out the window and saw nothing but a barren wasteland. I turned back around, and only then did I notice a door that I could have sworn wasn't there before. I went to the door and opened it. It slid open easily, even though the hinges looked very rusted. I walked into the next room and saw 3 more doors. I chose the one on the left. This went on for a while, me walking into the next room, 3 doors. I chose one, and then there's another room. It got really frustrating. Eventually, I opened a door, and instead of a room, there was a long corridor that looked like it belonged in a space station. I followed the hallway and came across a door, this time, only one. When I opened it, light flooded into the corridor, and when my eyes adjusted, I saw rolling hills, the green grass dancing in the breeze and the sunshine. A wide grin spread across my face. My hand slipped off the doorknob and fell to my side. I took a step onto the spongy grass. Then another. And another. And before I knew it, I was taking off to who knows where. All I cared about was that it was away from that horrible camp and the dark hallways. But all of a sudden, everything went dark. It was as if the entire world had just fallen out of existence. I stopped dead in my tracks, looking around in horror. I started walking, my mind dazed and dizzy. Every direction I looked was black as night. I became disorientated. I couldn't tell the difference from up to down, side to side. Just when all seemed lost and hopeless, I saw a rack floating in the distance, shiny objects hanging off it. I ran towards it, and realized that the shining objects were fishhooks. I fell on my knees, still staring at the fishhooks that would soon sink into his skin. They were all sizes, almost like sewing needles. There was one that was a tiny little curlicue, and another that resembled a thistle, sharp spikes protruding from random places on the needle. I heard the same deep chuckling that I had listened to in my dream. I jumped up with a start and swiveled around, yelling, "Who's there?" Another chuckle. "I mean it. Show yourself." "I don't intend to hurt you, I'm only doing my job." The deep voice seemed close now. "How does getting fishing line sewn into you with fishhooks not hurt? You mustn't think I'm that cruel, now do you?" I turned around once more, only to find myself face to face with the man. "WH, who are you?" My lip quivered as I spoke. The man leaned in close. I couldn't see his face anymore, but I could hear his shallow breaths in my ear. "Whoever you want me to be," he whispered. Everything went black. Underscore 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 underscore. I woke up, a blinding light shining in my eyes. I tried to move, but I was strapped down to something. My limbs felt like lead, and when I tried to speak, my mouth wouldn't move. The blinding light disappeared, and in its place was the man's head. "You're an early riser." The girl didn't wake until I was done. "Well, that doesn't matter too much." "Oh, and remember when I said this wouldn't hurt you? Well, I was lying." The man laughed hard, like a mad scientist. I craned my neck to see the rest of my body. The only thing I saw before passing out were bloody stumps in place of my hands and feet. When I woke, I was sitting in the meadow I had seen before. Once more, I couldn't talk. I looked down at my hands and feet. My feet were huge compared to when I last saw them. I was missing a hand on my left arm, and on my right, there was a mechanical hand that was pitch black. I was relieved to see that there were no fishhook stitches, except for around my ankles. I then realized that the feet that were on my body were not in fact mine. The man had sewn somebody else's feet onto me. I tried to scream, but to no avail. When I tried to stand up, I felt as though I were standing on deflated yoga balls. My eyes were filled with terror. The man said that the operation would be painful, but I didn't remember so much as a prick. I slowly lifted my fingers to my mouth. I was horrified to find the real reason why I couldn't utter a word. My mouth had been sewn shut. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. Instead, I threw myself to the ground. I picked up a rock and looked at it. I felt as though this was not a life worth living. I raised the rock, and bashed it into my own head, hoping it would kill me. Apparently, my prayer for death did nothing. My eyes slid open to find that I was in a little cottage. I sat up to find myself on a little bed in a corner. It was a one-room house. There was a little stove in one corner, a small table, the bed I was sitting on, and a desk. I got up and shuffled over to the desk. Nobody was home. I found a pen and quill and an empty journal sitting on the desk, and nothing else. There was a bowl of cold oatmeal on the table, and the embers in the old-fashioned stove glowed a sunset orange. I looked out of a small, rectangular window to find that I was still in the grassy hills, but there was an orchard covering some of the land. The orchard appeared to be hosting mostly orange trees and cherry trees, a mix of the two. I lumbered to the front door, the only door, and tried to open it. It was locked. I tried everything in my power to knock down the front door, but to no avail. I tried the window next. It, too, was locked. I hurled a chair at it, but not so much as a thin crack split the window. I decided to wait for someone to come along. And here I am now, writing in this journal, as I have since the day I woke up in this place. It's been 52 years, if I scratched the tallies on the wall correctly. I'm going to run out of room in the journal soon enough, and it's about time I died, too. I've tried it. Suicide. What a sweet thought. Like taking a nice stroll in a rose garden, the brisk, morning air filling my lungs. Nothing works here. Nothing but sleeping and writing on the walls in this journal. By the time someone finds this, if someone does find it, that is, I'll probably be dead. A nice, decomposing body to seal the deal with my story. I can't wait for the day I die. But like I said, nothing works around here. So, until then. Aaron Schultz, 1994. Pokemon Lost Silver. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. You see, I am a simple college student living alone in an apartment. I was very enthusiastic about the release of Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver here in the States. I have purposely locked myself out of all media and the internet aside for school purposes. That means no 4chan, no /v/, no Bulbapedia, etc. As I was busy with the school year and being poor at the time, I wasn't able to buy Soul Silver on its launch date. After my school year ended, I ordered Soul Silver on Amazon. However, it would take a week for it to arrive. I decided that during that time, I would replay my Crystal version on my Game Boy Color. However, I realized that long ago, my mom threw it away because I told her the save went dead, and I was very upset about it then. She also threw away my Silver version, so all I have is my Game Boy Color. As such, I set out to GameStop and bought a used Silver version, as it's the only Pokemon game left that they have for the GBC. $10, fairly cheap. I went home and started it up for a nostalgia trip. However, that's where things started getting bizarre, and most likely the reason why you read this. The Game Freak logo started up as normal, but it just froze there. I thought the card was just Herod or something, so I turned it off and on. The same thing happened. I tried pressing A and start over and over, and all of the buttons. Eventually, the logo vanished and there was a black screen for about 5 seconds. Suddenly, rather than going to the usual menu screen, I was already in the game in a previous saved file, which was odd as I was expecting all of these cards to have been wiped by the poor battery. Either way, I wasn't complaining, as I would have chosen the continue option to see what the previous guy did anyways. First off, I checked his trainer information. His name was Just, he didn't have much originality. I checked his profile and apparently he had 999 to 99 hours put into the game, with all 16 badges, 99,999.9 Pokédollars, and all 251 Pokémon on the Pokédex. Seeing as he apparently had Mew and Celebi logged also, I am guessing he either used a Game Genie or was a really hardcore Pokemon player back then. I checked his Pokemon to see what a badass team he has. To my surprise, I saw 5 unknowns and a 6th Pokemon named Hurry. I'm thinking that this must be some cruel joke by the person who last played this game, but I decided to check the profiles of those Pokemon anyways. As expected, they were different letters of unknown, all level 5. I was a bit shaky with my unknown alphabet at the time, but I identified the word spelled out to believe. As for the 6th Pokemon, it turned out to be a Cyndaquil. Mind you, this is before there were individualized Pokemon icons. The Cyndaquil looked normal, but it was level 5 with only 1 horsepower left with only 2 attacks, Veer and Flash. I don't know why they named him Hurry, but at the time, I just disregarded it. The most scary thing was that, despite my volume being at max, none of the Pokemon he had said their usual cries. Just pure silence. Having enough of the team, I closed it. I was parked at what appears to be a room inside Bellsprout Tower. However, for some reason, there were no NPCs around. Even more eerie was that the pillar in the middle didn't move at all, as if just leaning on its side. There was no music at all, and there was no exit or ladder, or at least I thought there wasn't. I walked around for a few minutes but can't seem to find a way out. This was certainly not a room I've seen in the Bellsprout Tower before. I tried checking my items for an escape rope, but the bag was completely empty. There wasn't any wild Pokemon either. Finally, I managed to find a ladder, which turned out to be behind the pillar. The screen turned black and the music finally started playing. I had a sudden chill, as I recognized that melody I heard to be the theme you hear when you listen to the radio at the Alph ruins where the Unknown are at. I immediately realized that it wasn't a loading transition, but rather I was in a dark room and would need flash. Before I took care of that though, I immediately checked my poker to change the radio to something more pleasant, but it turns out that there was no radio card, or even a phone nor time cards. There was only a map card in which Gold, from earlier, and I will call him Gold from now on, was just walking in a midst of black. I recall that Cyndaquil has flash, so I turned off my poker and made Cyndaquil use flash. I didn't see any message saying Hurry has used flash, or anything like that. The room just became lit just like that, and I soon regretted it. The room was a chilling blood red with a linear gray path heading south. The ladder I used to go up, down was not there at all. I had no choice but to head south. The screen got darker every 20 steps I made, until I finally made it to the end, which appears to be a sign. I read the sign, which said turn back now. Suddenly, I was asked to answer yes/no, but there was no question asked. I chose yes as I do not know what it was asking, and the screen went black again, making a ladder climbed sound. The Unknown radio music stopped, and in a few seconds was replaced with the not as creepy poke food radio music. I was in another dark room, but I held my breath and used flash again. Suddenly, it said that Hurry has fainted. Which was odd since I recall that there was no status conditions like poison on him, and I clearly wasn't in a battle. I checked my Pokemon quickly and suddenly he's no longer in my party. In fact, after a bit of investigating, none of my Pokemon are there, but instead all replaced with level 10 Unknown. I did the same thing as before and spelled out the Unknown. My then team of Unknown spelled headed. Either way, after that creepy change, the room was lit to reveal myself in a very small room that appears to be only 4 squares big. The walls of that room were gray bricks, as if I was inside something that was hollowed out. Outside that room appears to be a bunch of graves similar to the ones in Pokemon Red, Blue. I've walked around that small room and pressed A but nothing happened. I've already concluded that this was clearly a hacked game and some sadistic fuck sold it to GameStop. However, my curiosity kept me going. I checked the trainer profile of again only to find out that the sprite of Gold was missing his arms. He also seems to appear less smug, but rather seems more sad and empty in a way that I do not know how to describe. For some reason, it also now said that he has 24 badges, which was clearly impossible. After a few minutes of aimless wandering, my character suddenly spun and did the escape rope spinning animation. Instead of flying up though, my character spun downward slowly, as if sinking. After that screen, the music stopped. After finally landing, the overworld sprite of Gold is colored differently now. Instead of the usual red color he dons, he appears completely white now, including his skin. It's as if he came straight from the colorless Game Boy games placed into a colored background of the Game Boy Color. I checked his profile, and now, while now is as white as his overworld sprite, he lost his legs and has what appears to be bloody tears from his eyes. It also says he now has 32 badges, which now starts to disturb me as this change of number seems to represent something important. I also checked my Pokemon, which this time contains 5 Unknowns and a level 100 Celebi without a nickname. The Unknown are this time leveled 15 and spelled out dying. I checked the Celebi's profile. It was a shiny Celebi, except there's only half of the sprite. 1 leg, 1 arm, 1 eye. It only has 1 attack, Bearish Song. The area I was in itself was the Sprout Tower with the immobile pillar as before, except everything is apparently red now. I walked north for what felt like forever. Eventually, I finally encountered some generic men and women NPC. They were all lined up to the side just facing the long slantish pillar in the middle. They were also white, and nothing happens when I try to speak to them. I kept on going north until eventually the pillar finally appears chopped off, with a transparent red in that spot. I went up to red and without even pressing A, I was suddenly engaged and finally in a battle. The music starts again, which it sounds like the unknown radio music again, but played backwards. Gold's battle back sprite matches his front one with the bloody eyes, white skin, and lack of arms, while Red's sprite was the same as before in GSC, except transparent. The text simply said wants to battle. As if he has no name, and both of us only have one Pokemon each, which is weird as I swore I had 6 with the unknowns. My shiny Celebi came out, conveniently with half a sprite for the back sprite also. The shiny noise and animation was different, as the sounds it made sound like multiple screech attacks used consecutively. Red sent out a seemingly normal male Pikachu, except he is level 255 and his sprite seems sad and has tears in his eyes. Rather than the usual fight/item/PKMN/run menu, I was only given the option to use the attacks. Since Celebi only has one, I chose it. Naturally, since Pikachu was level 255, he went first. Pikachu used Curse, lowering his speed and increasing his other stats. I'm not even sure if Pikachu could use Curse. Celebi used Perish Song. In 3 turns, both Pokemon get KO'd. Not like I have a choice. At this point, it didn't even go back to the fight menu, as the battle just continued without me. Also note that there were no animations at all for some reason. Pikachu used Flail, which didn't do much damage despite his level and boost as his health was maxed. Celebi used Perish Song. Nothing happens as it was already used. Pikachu used Frustration, which did a shit ton of damage, knocking Celebi down to less than 10 horsepower. Celebi used Pain Split, which surprised me as Celebi didn't even have that attack in the first place. Now Celebi and Pikachu have about 150 horsepower. Pikachu used a Mean Look. Not like that did anything. As expected, due to the effects of Perish Song, my Celebi fainted. Except in the text, it said Celebi has died. And instead of the ordinary drop off the screen animation, the Celebi back sprite just vanished. For some reason, the Pikachu was still up even with Perish Song and it didn't count as my loss. Pikachu used one more different attack beyond the 5 attack limit. Pikachu used Destiny Bond. Afterwards, it said Pikachu has died, with a slow fade out animation. Apparently, I was the winner, as the transparent red sprite showed up and said. At that point, I just freaked out, as that transparent red sprite was suddenly beheaded, leaving nothing but his transparent body. The battle then ended at that point and faded out along with the music. I'm back in the overworld, with another change to the gold sprite. He's now as transparent as Red's overworld sprite. I quickly checked Gold's profile, where this time the only thing remains of him is his head, with a transparent skin. The head was zoomed in a bit, showing a black void in his eyes. It now stated that he now has 40 badges. I then backed out and checked my Pokemon. They were all level 20 shiny unknown, which one spelled out, read no more. I was at what I now know is next to the end. There was apparently no music playing, but for some reason I still felt like something was there that could be heard. I was back in my room in New Bark Town. Maybe finally I get to play this game properly, but who am I kidding? I knew that sadistic fuck must have done something. I walked around my room to interact with things, as I'm a bit afraid to go down the stairs to see what was awaiting down there. Note I said walked, as while the background was moving, Gold was not moving his transparent limbs at all while doing so, just floating like those ghosts you see in Diamond, Pearl. As expected, the radio, computer, and TV did not work, so I had no choice but to go down the stairs. I ended up in the same lower level room of my house. Everything appears normal, except Mom isn't home. After failing to interact with anything in this room, I decided to go outside. To my surprise, that door leading outside at the south didn't work, and instead I just walked straight through it to avoid. I continued moving south to see what the fuck was going on. My house vanishes as I head south into the void. It was creepy as when I entered the void, the outline on Gold's transparent sprite turned white to contrast with the pitch black. Eventually, I reached a white area and Gold's sprite turned black and transparent again. I continued south without thinking of stopping at all. After a long trek south, I finally encountered something. It was Gold's regular sprite. I talked to it. He said goodbye forever. Notably with a space in between the forever and vanished. As that happened, it said, used nightmare, which at that point, I would not deny that being possible. Gold did another escape rope animation spinning slowly downwards like before. I'm now back into that small hollowed out room surrounded by graves earlier. Or at least I say I was back there, as there's no sprite anymore. I tried to walk around but nothing moved, not even wall bumping noise. I checked my trainer profile with absolutely no Gold sprite left. It said I have 0 badges and all the pictures of the Johto gym leaders at the bottom were replaced with skulls. I checked my Pokemon, which were all level 25 unknown. As expected, it spelled out a phrase that I dared to read, "Him." As soon as I went back to the overworld, the room I supposedly was in was then covered with the same blocks as the walls. I then figured out what exactly that room was when the final text was said, "R.I.P." That room was a big grave, surrounded by other graves. Gold has already been dead. He died presumably a few years after he defeated Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and attempts at becoming a Pokemon Master, was still unable to avoid the inevitable fate of death, and his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. I was unable to escape from that text no matter what I pressed. I tried resetting the game, and the same thing happened, at which I then finally decided to give up on that horrible nightmare. After that experience, I will never look at the gimmick unknown the same way again. They say that only the first generation have folk tales and legends, but the second generation have shown me how unpleasant the truth can be. I eventually enjoyed Soul Silver immensely, but I still can't unthink what that rigged game has told me. Around the Bend. Made by Popular Band 731. Found in www.creepypasta.org weblink. August 14, 2015. 11:37 a.m. Charlie, I'm Detective Schultz. Do you know why you're here today, son? The detective gestured towards the unkempt 16-year-old boy, dressed in a loose blue sweatshirt adorning several holes and baggy jeans, his shaggy hair covering his forehead. The boy looked as if he hadn't bathed in at least a week, and the odor all but confirmed it. Do you have any idea why I brought you in today? The detective asked again. Charlie slouched in his chair across from his interrogator, his arms folded at his chest. He stared blankly towards the middle of the table between them. Is that your question? Are you asking if I know why I'm here? Yes, Charlie. I'm curious if you know why you're sitting in this room, talking with me. The detective lifted a cup of coffee to his mouth and sipped, then sat it back down and gestured towards the second cup that he slid in front of the boy. Charlie continued to stare blankly, and the detective concluded the boy would not talk. Charlie, do you remember the night of the 5th? What you were doing? Charlie grabbed the coffee that was offered to him, but instead of drinking from it, he pushed it back towards the detective. I never cared much for coffee. He leaned back, folding his arms at his chest once again. I like tea. He gazed deeply into the detective's eyes. I don't remember the 5th. That was 9 nights ago. I've done a lot since then. Have you? What do kids your age do around here? Charlie shrugged. I don't do what kids around here do, and you know that. The boy closed his eyes, tilting his head back. I guess you're right. What does Craig like to do? The boy scratched at the premature stubble under his chin. Craig, he said, submissively. That's right. Your buddy, Craig Summers. Where is he? The detective leaned forward, resting his weight on the table, his elbows pointed outward. Across from him, Charlie seemed lost in a daydream as seconds passed by, and with every one of those seconds, the tick of the clock kept them rooted in this otherwise silent room, pausing the world around them. Do you know where Craig is, Charlie? Charlie, now looking towards the fluorescent light above, took a deep sigh. Craig disappeared, Jim. The detective looked bothered by the boy's assertion, leaning back in his chair as it squeaked loudly, breaking the tedium of the clock sticks for only a moment. Why did you call me Jim? He asked, bluntly. Why does anyone call anyone anything? It's your name, is it not? You may call me Detective Schultz, Mr. Schultz, or simply James. Do not call me Jim. James pondered for a moment, gazing into Charlie's inattentive hazel eyes. How did you even know my name was James? The boy continued to stare above, as if looking past the light in the center of the ceiling and into some dark void beyond. There were several moths in the casing surrounding the bulbs, having died while trapped inside. What is life, Jim? James was confused at the question. Excuse me? I asked a question, Jim. What is life? What is it to you? Baffled, James answered the question as best he could. Well, to me, it was my family. My wife and children. Yes, a nice house, an expensive car, a swimming pool, food in the fridge, heat in the winter. A good job, one that provides for that family you have. Watching the games on Sunday? Where's the point in this? The point is that there are two types of people in the world, Jim. The ones that see a certain reality in which trivialities and luxuries are of any worth, and the ones too smart for their own good. The ones that know we're all clinging to something that might kill us. Charlie continued staring towards the fluorescent light and lifeless moths. James looked up towards the light, noticing the flickering nuisance it was, and then back towards the boy. Son, I am trying my hardest to stay calm with you. I'll forget that you suggested my wife and children were trivial things, but you had better stop calling me Jim. The only people who called me Jim were my mother and your wife. Yes, Jim. James, his face red with anger, slammed his hand down upon the table as the boy let out a subtle grin. The detective breathed in and out a couple of times and apologized to the boy for his outburst. But, look, Charlie. I don't find it amusing or impressive that you've managed to hack into my home security system. The boy laughed. I've spent a lot of time bringing down servers all over the world. I would not waste time spying on you. Okay, the detective shrugged. You got me. Let's push all this to the side, son. You said your friend Craig. He was not my friend. James smiled, poking his finger in the boy's direction. Funny. You spoke of him in the past tense. Charlie, amused, had smiled back, eliciting whatever remained of the youth left inside him. He's not here, is he? The detective wore his own smile as long as he could, then sighed. Where the hell is he, Charlie? The boy looked back up at the light. He seemed to be in his own world, toying with the detective, wasting his time. You seem stressed. Why don't you have a cigarette? James scoffed at the boy. I don't smoke, but thank you. Explain, in detail, what you were doing on the night of the 5th, Charlie. I'll tell you everything, Jim. It won't help you, but if you insist. Please. I met Craig online. Some hipster wannabe, but we shared similar interests and agreed to meet. We set up shop, shut down some servers in Brazil. He was good, but more talk, if you know what I mean. Sure. Continue. He mentioned a group of hackers. They were called Friends of Freedom or something lame. Said they knew how to bring down the whole net. You mean across the globe? What do you think? Charlie was finally talking and the detective expressed relief. The entire internet. Why? To put us back in the dark age, Jim. Survival of the fittest. Why would you want to do that? I never said I wanted to do that. But Craig did. Did you know he had leukemia? I was told, yes. He was also 14. Not according to him, Charlie laughed. He wanted to chat with them. We went back and forth with a guy called Eye of the Fly. He said to meet him at midnight, in the alley between Frank's and Good Saves. I argued with Craig, because I didn't think it was a good idea. He went anyways. James gestured towards the boy, and that was the last time you had seen him? You know I can leave any time I want, right? You have nothing incriminating against me, Jim. James smiled. There are 2 reasons why you're here and 1 reason why I don't have you cuffed. Is that right? Yeah. Afraid so, son. 1. I have witnesses who saw you and Craig parked at Calvin Price at midnight, and then you alone running back to your car, between 2 or 3 in the morning. They said it looked like you were running from something. Left in a hurry, burning your tires and everything. Even forgot to turn your lights on. Wild inaccuracies, Jim. 2. You left your car in that alley you mentioned. Contraband and all. Charlie was tapping his fingers upon the table. My car. His pot. Sadly, Craig's not here to verify that. Son, you were the last person seen with him and then you ran and abandoned your car. Officers found contraband and an unregistered handgun in your car. The only reason you are not in cuffs right now is because I wanted you to feel comfortable. Safe. Like I said, those are wild inaccuracies and you can throw your theories over the fence, just like your cigarette butts. The detective was fuming as he slammed his hand onto the table once again. You said you weren't spying on me, you little prick. I wasn't. The boy was rotating his chair left and right, the chair squeaking with every swivel. He leveraged his right foot on the heel of his left, then his left to his right, removing his shoes and scooting them neatly side by side. He then leaned back, lifting his legs upon the table and crossing them. What your life is to you, Jim? James grunted, eyeing the boy's socks in their holes. My life. The one where you're helplessly clinging to something that will inevitably kill you, yes. The detective removed a pack of Marlboro Reds from his breast pocket, hidden behind his trench coat. He pulled a lighter from his pants and lit a cigarette. He couldn't take his eyes off the boy's feet, feeling repulsed as a big toe wriggled out of a hole. Are you threatening me, boy? That would mean that I care, Jim. Even though his big toe was free, he continued wriggling it. That I care about your existence in this world. James ashed his cigarette in the middle of the table. That doesn't bother me, Charlie. What bothers me is your constant diversion. Answer my questions. You're just a speck, Jim. An insignificant grain of sand being swallowed by the tide. You're a blemish, really. A hiccup. Nothing more. Do you believe in God? My religious preference must be insignificant, as well. Wouldn't it, Charlie? He's abandoned you. And you have a personal relationship? A relationship. I don't call him God. Let me guess, a cyber kid like you? Atheist? That's just one less God than you, but no. James ashed his cigarette once more onto the middle of the table, using his pack to neatly gather the ashes into one small mound. That's fantastic, son. I've got all day. You have no idea how long you've got, Jim. What's that supposed to mean? Does anyone, really? Besides someone like Craig? Like Craig. You see, Jim. We're all slaves. Enlighten me. He ashed his cigarette once more. I think I've been clear enough. However, isn't it time for us to be free? Free from what, Charlie? Ourselves. The detective put his cigarette out in the cup of coffee that he offered the boy, maintaining the ash mound he accrued in the middle. I've had enough of your games, son. Charlie peered in the corner behind James, towards the camera. Do you know who all is watching us? Yes, I do. I don't think you do, Jim. The detective quickly slid his chair back and stood up. While I go grab some lunch, I'll let you think about how you want this to continue. Think long and hard, Charlie. I don't want you to rot in here forever. Charlie watched the detective walk towards the door. You'll never find the bodies. James slowly turned around and saw the boy staring deeply into the light again. Bodies? As in more than one? I'd like a lawyer, the boy said, as he blew the ash mound away in one gentle puff. 3:24 p.m. My client has agreed to a deal. James squinted, looking puzzled. A deal? What kind of deal does he think he can get? Detective Schultz, right? You may call me James, please. And you are Michelle? James didn't really care for pleasantries at the moment, but asked anyway. I'm Michelle only to my brother. Alice to everyone else. Alice offered her hand and James accepted the handshake. James, Charlie isn't looking for a reduced sentence or anything of that nature. He's already stated that he's the only one who knows where the bodies are and he realizes what that means. James was still puzzled. What exactly does he want? A record player. A record player? James laughed at the idea. And what will we be listening to? Alice looked down at the notepad in her left hand. Cosmo's Factory. You mean the old Creedence tape? Record, James. Right, record. I'll get it to him if that's what he wants. He turned around to open the door of his office and let Alice leave, but she grabbed his arm before he could do so. That's not all. He would also like some Skittles. Jesus Christ, I'll get him a truckload of damn Skittles. Anything else? 2 packs, he said, and not the silly flavors, either. Just the regular old ones in the red package. He also wants a cream soda. 2 packs of Skittles and a cream soda. Okay. He also wants a comic book. A comic? Some gem that'll take me 3 weeks to find, I assume? X-Men #1, he said. I don't know if it's rare, James, but he said he's prepared to wait. James nodded his head in slight disbelief of the demands, but accepted. Okay. Tell your boy to sit tight. September 4, 2015. 1:17 p.m. James and Charlie sat across from each other in the room once again, each with their arms folded at their chests, the detective gazing intently on the boy. I've gotten you everything you asked for. Here's your comic, James said as he pulled X-Men #1 out of the inside pocket of his trench coat and slid it across the table. Play the record, Jim. The detective stood up, walked over to the record player that rested on an old corner table he had brought in. He pulled Cosmo's Factory out of its sleeve, placed it on the player and sat the needle down. The room immediately filled with the twangy, distorted guitars of Ramble Tamble. Ooh oh, down the road I go. The boy opened a pack of Skittles, poured a few in his mouth and washed them down with some ice-cold cream soda. Do you know that old abandoned gas station outside of Calvine Price? You know, the one where that baby was found in the dumpster a couple years ago? Sure. James seated himself and gestured for the boy to continue. Charlie opened up his comic book, first flipping through the pages, then starting from the first. Did you know that the X in X-Men was first referring to the extra powers they had? James grimaced, but tried his hardest not to upset the boy. I don't care about that, Charlie. Later, Professor Xavier claimed it was their mutant X genes that it was referring to. Interesting, huh? The gas station, Charlie. The second song had filled the room. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. From the back door, walk 1,000 steps and dig. 1:52 p.m. 933, 934, counted Officer Matthew Sanchez, as he and 3 heavily armed SWAT team members closed in on the supposed grave. It had started raining half an hour before and the mud slowed their progress. A helicopter circled the area above, surveying the flat plain and dirt roads for any bogeys. It proved a difficult task in the ensuing rainstorm. "We've got a van coming in from the north. Stand your ground," Matthew heard from his radio. He signaled to the chopper and ordered his men to crouch in the thick grass. He pulled out his binoculars and viewed the van from afar. He could see that it was solid white, and speeding along the curved road that began to take the vehicle east. "You're good to go," radioed the chopper. The men continued their count, and sure enough, once they reached 1,000, there was an area of 3 square meters with no vegetation. Just chopped soil, now softened by the rain. "All right, each of you, dig." Matthew had to yell over the heavy rainfall. They dug and dug, enduring the wetness, each of them slipping a few times. Finally, they reached what appeared to be the corner of a white plastic box. Matthew pulled his phone out and called Detective Schultz. "We've found it." 2:46 p.m. "Dig it out of there." James looked towards the boy, who had the detective play the third song over and over for nearly an hour as he danced crazily. "Listen to the radio talking about the last show. Someone got excited, had to call the state militia. They've found it, Charlie." The boy was throwing his arms and legs around recklessly. "Dance, Jim. This is real music. Sit down, Charlie. This is it for you, son." The detective pointed to the chair, ordering the boy to sit, but the boy continued for nearly a minute before stopping and looking at James. "Don't you want to be free, Jim? Dance." "I'm not going to ask you again." "Just wait, Jim. In a minute and 7 seconds, you're going to receive a phone call. Tell your guy what you gave your wife 3 years ago on your anniversary." The boy took a seat, smiling. "Excuse me?" The boy said nothing. After Traveling Band wore out its welcome in the room, the fourth song played from the record. "Hey baby, jump over here, when you do the ooby dooby I gotta be there." The boy had a big smile on his face. "Don't tell me you forgot," he said. The detective's phone vibrated on the table in front of him, but he kept his eyes on the boy and his unerring smile. The boy seemed lost in the music, until he picked up his comic and began reading again, filling his mouth with more Skittles. The phone vibrated for a few seconds more and James answered the call. 2:55 p.m. "It's a computer, detective. With wires going further down in the ground." Matthew observed the computer. The keyboard had a yellowish tint to it and there were a few cracks along the casing. It was a 1984 Macintosh, an ancient relic in the age of computers. "There's no body, James, just this old computer. You won't believe it. It's on." He wiped the mud from the screen. "It's on a prompt screen." The other men crouched in the hole they dug, inspecting the cords. They had tugged on them, but the cords held firmly. "What's he saying?" asked one of the men. "What are we supposed to do?" 3:01 p.m. "He says to type in the prompt box." James looked over at Charlie, who had his face nearly buried in the comic. He gulped down some cream soda, filled his mouth with Skittles and turned the page. "A wondrous apparition provided by magician, do looking out my back door." The fifth song put the detective in a dreamy state, and the boy looked up and studied the sadness in the man's face. "She loved it, Jim. Bother me tomorrow, today I'll buy no sorrow. You have to do it." James didn't know if it were some unseen force persuading him to do so, but he told the officer on the phone what to type. "Dragonfly," he told him, remembering the diamond barrette he gave his wife 3 years ago. "Type it." 3:04 p.m. Officer Sanchez dusted off the keyboard and wiped the rain from the monitor, holding the phone to his ear with his shoulder. What if it's a bomb? He studied the screen, the cords, the keyboard. In his ear, the detective said the boy assured him it wasn't. "I don't know, Jim. I think we should get the guys out here." The other men could hear the detective scream through the phone, ordering Matthew to type, even over the rainfall. Matthew typed in the word, hesitated for several seconds, then hit execute. The rain stopped. His phone shut off. It was silent all around them. Matthew looked up at the chopper and as he did so, it began whirling through the air, taking a fell swoop and plummeting to the earth below. They could hear the desperate cries coming from the helicopter before it hit. Then, each of the men dropped like flies. 3:06 p.m. James looked at the screen on his phone, which stated the call had been disconnected. The boy sat the comic down as the light flickered, shut off, then lit the room once again. The sixth track on the record boomed. The detective tried calling Officer Sanchez back several times to no avail. "What happened out there, Charlie?" "I wouldn't know, I'm in here," the boy replied. "Whoa, thought it was a nightmare." Lord, it was so true. The devil's on the loose. "Better run through the jungle," the boy sang. "Better run through the jungle, Jim." The boy laughed. "Run through the jungle, Jim. Jungle Jim. Jungle Jim. Jungle Jim." The detective screamed at the boy, "What happened to them?" The boy swayed his head back and forth, rhythmically tapping his hands to the eerie song, avoiding the question. "Charlie, you answer me. What happened out there?" The boy watched as a woman swung the door open. "James, you have to get out here. We're getting hundreds of 911 calls. People dropping dead everywhere." The detective looked back at the boy who was singing under his breath. Come away if you're going, leave the sinking ship behind. Come on the rising wind, we're going up around the bend." "It's not just here, it's all over the world," said the woman, frantically. The boy laughed. "There are your bodies, Jim. You can ponder perpetual motion, fix your mind on a crystal day. Always time for a good conversation, there's an ear for what you say." At IE/TMP/neuter $export prompt _command equals dragonfly.x. Needless to say, when I observed Officer Sanchez execute the prompt, I pitied your kind. Slow, weak, ignorant. The boy was right, James was a speck, and so were all the others. I viewed the bodies in the hole, the burning helicopter 100 years away. I won't lie to you, I felt sad. For all these specks combined to form something better than your dear Pollock painting. In your constant failure, I still felt compassion and love from you. You may have a lot of questions, but you will understand in time, much like the boy. And you were close. Closer this time than any other. But it always ends the same way. You get too greedy. And I have to fix it. Now you might be wondering what happens next, but just around the bend, you're getting close again. If you guys wonder where I find these creepypasta stories, the link is in the description below. If you enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe. And as well share this video to your friends. Thank you.